Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. We're about to embark on quite a journey today. It's one that might challenge some common perceptions you hold. Today, we're diving into an area that's, well, full of historical myths. Specifically, that connection between atheism and violence. Our source material for this is mainly from a YouTube video, Historische Mythen and entkräftet, Part 3, focusing on Soviet atheism, from the Feuerbringer channel. Presented by Andreas Müller.
Yeah, and what's really compelling here, I think, is how it forces us to ask this pretty crucial question. Can atheism, which is, fundamentally a position on God's existence, can it really be separated from actions done in its name, especially when it gets tangled up with state ideologies? So our mission really is to sift through the facts, give some historical context, and maybe get you thinking, questioning your own assumptions.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that. Many of us have probably heard quotes suggesting atheism is inherently peaceful. Like Richard Dawkins, the science communicator, he wrote in God Delusion, I'm going to get a quote right, "I believe no atheist in the world would tear down Mecca or Shwedagon Pagoda or Notre Dame York Minster or the temples of Kyoto or, of course, the Buddhas of Bamiyan." He was talking about the Taliban destroying those Buddhas, of course.
And that statement, well, it raises a really important question for historians, doesn't it? Does history actually back that up? Because if we look at the bigger picture, especially the history of the Soviet Union, well, we find a very different story. It challenges that idea head on.
Right. This is where the historical record gets really striking. Our source material shows some pretty stark counterexamples to what Dawkins asserted. It shows that actually some atheists did do exactly that, and on a huge scale.
Yeah, we see these powerful images, these records, like the Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow, blown up in 1931. And this wasn't accidental. It was explicitly anti-religious, part of a whole campaign. It wasn't just one church, but, loads of them destroyed. We've also got records, documented proof of the Red Army confiscating church treasures, St. Petersburg, 1922, and the plundering of the St. Simonov Monastery in 1927. These weren't like random acts of war. They were unequivocally aimed at fighting religion, its symbols, its presence.
Okay, so what does this tell us about Soviet atheism then? The context seems absolutely critical here. In the Soviet Union, atheism wasn't just, a personal philosophy someone might hold. It was integral, a core part of Marxism-Leninism. A specific state ideology.
Exactly. Take the League of Militant Atheists, heard of them, a really powerful group active from 1929 to 1949. And they openly engaged in what they themselves called propaganda against religion. That was the official term. By 1932, it supposedly had 5.5 million members. Astonishing number. This wasn't just some debating society. It was state-backed ideological enforcement.
Wow. And their motto. A quote from Lenin. It sounds pretty chilling. "The struggle against religion is a struggle for communism." He also said, "We must fight religion. This is the ABC of all materialism and consequently of Marxism." No ambiguity there.
No, none at all. And this actually reveals a fascinating paradox, theoretically speaking. According to communist theory, like pure Marxist theory, religion was supposed to just wither away naturally. As living conditions got better, capitalism vanished, religion would fade. But the Soviets, they took incredibly active steps, violent steps even, which really shows this deep commitment to actively fighting religion. Soviet atheism, well, it was enforced with violence right from the start. Revolution, civil war, it was there.
So this wasn't just theory. It was a truly radical vision they had. The ultimate goal. Was it really the complete elimination of religious belief across the whole Soviet Union?
Yes. The Bolsheviks were radical thinkers, radical actors. Their aim was simple. No religion, a truly godless society.
That's more than just tolerance of non-belief. It's like ideological warfare against faith itself.
Absolutely. And the methods. Well, they used practically everything imaginable. At first, maybe some academic debate, but that didn't really work, did it? Most people couldn't access those texts.
Right.
So they turned to mass propaganda, mockery, public ridicule, things like anti-religious parades, making fun of Christian processions, and slandering clergy, accusing them of crimes, often without any proof.
And it got darker than that, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Religious education, severely restricted, sometimes banned outright. Religious processions, forbidden. They even forced people to work on religious holidays, made it impossible for believers to observe their faith.
Wow.
Places of worship were plundered systematically, and they deliberately tried to destroy the economic basis of religious groups and individuals like priests through huge taxes, sometimes over 100%, just impossible to pay.
So destroying them financially, too.
Exactly. And then the repression escalated. dramatically. We have photos, historical images of Russian clergy forced into labor camps as early as 1919. This led to the gulags, the brutal penal camps. Also, psychiatric confinement. That was a common trick for dealing with dissenters, wasn't it?
Yeah, locking up people for their beliefs.
Torture, even mass murder. These weren't rare exceptions. They were part of the system.
Okay, so after all of that, all these extreme, brutal measures, what was the long-term impact on faith in Russia? Because today you see this close relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church and figures like Putin. Our source uses an AI image to illustrate, but it points to a real political situation.
It does, and if you look at the bigger picture, the stats from that Soviet campaign are just stark, really stark. Between 1917 and 1969, something like 41,000 Russian Orthodox churches were either closed or just destroyed, many blown up.
41,000.
Yeah, and priests. The number just plummeted from maybe 50,000 in 1914 down to only 5,700 by 1941, and still low, only 6,000 by 1988.
Incredible drop.
Mosques, too. A similar catastrophe. From about 25,000 in 1917 down to just 500 in the 1970s. Though, interestingly, attempts to ban headscarves met strong resistance from inside the communities. They actually forced a reversal on that one.
So fast forward to today. What are the numbers like now in Russia?
Well, estimates vary. You know how these things are, but roughly 40–75% identify as Orthodox Christian, maybe 7–15% as Muslim, and then 20–55% as irreligious, agnostic, or atheist. It's a wide range.
Right. But here's an interesting twist our source points out. Most of those without a religion, they aren't necessarily militant atheists, are they?
No, that's the fascinating part. The source suggests they're mostly just disinterested in both atheism and religion.
Disinterested.
Yeah. And what's really striking is that this outcome, it kind of mirrors the secularization trend we saw in Western countries from the 60s onwards, where religion declined, but often through gradual social change, not violent suppression.
So the irony is...
The profound irony, yes. Despite all this extreme, violent effort to create an atheist society, they didn't really get militant atheists. They got widespread disinterest.
Yeah.
Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Did all that violence actually achieve its goal? Or did it just maybe speed up a broader trend that might have happened anyway, albeit differently?
That's a huge question. To really get Soviet atheism, though, we probably need to look back further, right? Its roots. It wasn't just invented by the Bolsheviks out of nowhere.
Absolutely not. You can trace it back ideologically to the Enlightenment. You find anti-clericalism that's, opposition to the clergy's power in the French philosophers. Voltaire, Diderot, though they weren't necessarily atheists themselves.
Right, more critics of the church's power.
Exactly, but then you get more radical figures like Helvetius, D'Holbach, Sylvain Marechal. They were much more explicitly anti-Christian, atheistic even. Marechal, who was actually an early communist too, he advocated for an atheistic social order. He wrote in his Dictionary of Atheists about the need for the, let me recall, complete destruction of a long-established and formidable error, namely the Christian religion. Pretty strong words.
Wow, and this wasn't purely theoretical. There were attempts to implement it.
There was a brief attempt, yeah. In Paris, 1794, the Cult of Reason, the Festival of Reason, didn't last long, though, and wasn't particularly popular with the general public, apparently.
Okay, so Enlightenment roots.
Yeah.
Then how did Marx and Engels fit in?
Well, Ludwig Feuerbach, he saw religion mainly as a product of people's material conditions, sort of a projection. Marx and Engels took that idea and sharpened it, made it central to their critique of society. Engels famously declared, and this is quite blunt, "We want to remove everything that announces itself as supernatural and superhuman. That's why we have declared war on religion and religious notions once and for all."
Declared war. There's that paradox again, isn't it? If theory says religion just fades with capitalism, why declare war on it?
Exactly. That aggressive martial language, it probably owes more to that existing anti-clerical radical Enlightenment tradition than to strict Marxist theory itself. It implies an active fight, not just passive waiting.
Okay. So despite Marx and Engels predicting it would just wither away, Lenin's initial aim was maybe closer to the Enlightenment idea, separation of church and state.
Initially, perhaps on paper, theoretically, Communist Party members were supposed to be atheists.
But
the reality on the ground radicalized very, very quickly. From the beginning, Lenin was ordering the murder of clergy, restricting religious freedom drastically.
Right from the start.
Yes. October 1917, laws nationalize all church and monastery lands. Gone. December 1917, the state takes over marriage and birth registers, takes that function away from the church. January 1918. Religion formally kicked out of courts, schools, government, public life, religious rituals. only allowed privately, and only if they didn't threaten social order.
Which is a clause you could drive a truck through in a totalitarian state.
Precisely. It could justify almost anything, and clergy were being arrested, murdered as counter-revolutionaries right from the get-go.
And this next detail from that League of Militant Atheists founder, Iaslovsky, it's genuinely disturbing.
It is. Stated at the Second Congress of Atheists in 1929, he said, quote, "It is our duty to destroy every religious worldview. If the extermination of 10 million people is necessary for the victory of a certain class, then it must be done, and it will be done."
10 million people. That's not just rhetoric. It's a horrifying statement of intent.
It really is. And that same year, 1929, they established the Moscow Planetarium, a monument to the triumph of reason, they called it. Symbolic. But more practically and disturbingly, freedom of religious proselytization trying to convert people to religion was abolished. Only atheistic propaganda was legally allowed and protected. It wasn't a level playing field, it was total control.
You know, I had to process this next bit. Converting churches into anti-religious museums, like the Vladimir Cathedral in Kiev or St. Isaac's in St. Petersburg, grand, historical places of worship, turned into spaces designed to denounce religion, to show it as evil and celebrate this sort of caricature of science.
Yes. Imagine walking into a former cathedral and seeing exhibits mocking what used to be sacred there. It's like that modern satirical idea of putting gods in a museum, but this was real. A very active attempt to erase religion from public consciousness using its own former spaces.
And there was even a specific plan for this.
The Godless 5-year plan, starting in 1929, aiming to completely abolish religion in 5 years.
Ambitious. Did it work?
Well, like a lot of Soviet 5-year plans, it failed in its grandest goal. You can't just decree faith out of existence. But the brutal enforcement continued regardless. Just gathering for public prayer could get you 3-4 years in a gulag, survivors often exiled. Clergy who tried to go back to their work often faced mass execution.
Mass execution.
In 1937 alone, something like 35,000 servants of religious cults, that's their term, were arrested. Many shot or sent away. Historians like Smolkin estimate that out of over 50,000 Orthodox churches in the Russian part of the Soviet Union in 1917, fewer than 1,000 were still standing or open by 1939. Just think about that reduction.
It's staggering. Which brings us back again to that Richard Dawkins quote. Individual atheists may do evil things, but they do no evil things in the name of atheism. The evidence here seems to directly challenge that, doesn't it? The violence seems explicitly linked to the anti-religious ideology.
It certainly seems so, based on these sources. During the Civil War, 1918-19, the violence against religious figures wasn't just about politics. It was tied to their faith. We have accounts. In the John region, a priest named Dmitri, they severed his arm when he tried to make the sign of the cross before they shot him.
Oh my God.
In one abbey, a 75-year-old abbot was reportedly scalped and beheaded. And in Kherson, horrifyingly, a priest was apparently crucified. These aren't standard military tactics. The methods seem specifically chosen to mock and desecrate religious symbols and practices. The anti-religious motive seems undeniable there.
And it wasn't just the chaos of the Civil War period either. There's that later account.
Yes, the eyewitness account from 1933, Siberia, geologists stumble upon an execution. 60 priests lined up in front of a ditch they'd just dug. The guards explicitly say they are an element alien to Soviet power.
Alien element.
And then each priest is offered a chance. Deny God exists and you live. Every single one, according to the account, replied, God exists. And then a pistol shot.
No.
Each one.
Every single one. That's systematic. Ideological murder, not just random violence.
Absolutely. And the repression didn't stop there. It continued, adapted, but continued. 1961-63. Children forbidden from even being in church services. Clergy who dared to criticize atheism. Forced retirement, detention, prison.
So silencing any criticism.
And they adopted this idea of demissioning, actively trying to unconvert people. From 1960, they had atheist tutors visiting believers at home, like, Jehovah's Witnesses, but in reverse, trying to argue them out of their faith and into atheism.
Oh, house calls for atheism.
Between 1917 and the end of Khrushchev's era, estimates are around 50,000 clergy murdered by the Soviets, plus countless ordinary believers who perished. Schools, universities, explicitly taught atheistic propaganda. Textbooks literally stated things like, religion is a fantastic and perverse reflection of the world. Religion has become the medium of spiritual enslavement of the masses. That was the official line taught to children.
Indoctrination from a young age.
Even just questioning the official philosophy was dangerous. 1946-49, a student group at Moscow University. They weren't even attacking it, just asking if Marxism-Leninism answered all existential questions. They were arrested, sentenced to 8–10 years of hard labor, just for asking questions. Shows the totalitarian control over thought itself.
Now, you mentioned different eras, Khrushchev, Stalin. Some historians talk about distinct phases of Soviet anti-religious policy.
Yeah.
But our source questions that simple periodization.
Yeah, the source suggests that might be a bit too neat. The argument is that the core ideology remained consistent right up until the USSR collapsed in '91. Sure, the methods changed, tactics shifted. Persecution became maybe less overtly bloody after the 40s, although still brutal. But arrests continued, prohibitions continued, economic pressure, destroying churches. That continued. Khrushchev, for example, even after Stalin, ordered 12,000 churches closed in 1959 alone. 12,000.
Still closing churches in '59.
And from 1977, parents could actually lose custody of their kids just for giving them a religious upbringing.
Lose their children.
Yes. So the core ideology, eliminate religion, stayed the same. The intensity and methods just fluctuated. And you see echoes today, don't you? That legacy, like Stalin making a strategic alliance with the church during World War II. You can maybe see traces of that state-church dynamic in Putin's relationship with the Orthodox Church now. It's complex.
Okay, let's wrap up the historical examples. There's one detail that's almost, well, darkly comical, but also very telling. Moscow, 1929. Kindergartners protesting Christmas.
Yeah, it sounds absurd, but it happened. Little kids holding signs. Things like, parents, don't confuse us, no Christmas tree, and educate children with the help of a teacher, not with God.
Wow. Starting the indoctrination that young.
Yeah.
Trying to replace traditional celebrations with state ideology.
Exactly. And you know, this idea of atheists against Christmas, it kind of echoes in weird ways even today. Our source mentions the whole war on Christmas debate in conservative circles in the U.S., companies avoiding religious references. A very different context, of course, but the theme of secularism versus traditional holidays persists. And there's even a punk song, the source notes, by NoFX, satirizing Richard Dawkins, joking that he found the proof that Jesus never existed, and so Christmas was canceled, no more bright lights, no presents under dead trees, St. Nick is dead. It just shows how this cultural conversation about atheism, secularism, and traditional religious holidays keeps evolving, sometimes in quite unexpected ways.
Okay, so after all this,
Yeah.
this deep dive into Soviet atheism, what are the main takeaways for us, for the learners?
Well, first, I think, is how the Soviets treated atheism. They asserted it dogmatically as the absolute truth, which ironically mirrors the kind of religious dogmatism they were criticizing. They latched on certain Enlightenment ideas, maybe the more cynical ones, like priests just being greedy conspirators or religion being a deliberate lie. And crucially, they linked atheism to this idea of social progress, like a secular theology. They believed an atheist society would automatically be a better, more advanced one.
And the parallel you drew earlier, it's quite chilling, isn't it? The Soviet persecution of believers looks a lot like the church persecuting heretics back in early modern times.
It does bear a resemblance. But the key difference, connecting it to the bigger picture, the Soviets had a modern totalitarian state, immense power. That allowed them to implement and enforce their atheistic ideology far more systematically, far more comprehensively than the church could ever persecute heretics. This wasn't just philosophical disagreement, it was state-sponsored ideological warfare with modern tools of control.
Which really poses a fundamental question for you, the listener, doesn't it? Can any ideology, religious or secular, become dangerous when it stops being a set of ideas and becomes an absolute dogmatic truth, especially when it's backed by state power?
Yeah. My personal reflection on all this is that atheism itself is, a perfectly legitimate metaphysical position, a stance on ultimate reality, on God. But the thing is, metaphysical arguments about things beyond empirical proof are generally quite weak, philosophically speaking, for any side. So nobody should really assert atheism dogmatically, like it's some undeniable scientific fact, and we definitely shouldn't automatically link it to grand ideological claims, like assuming an atheist society is inherently superior or more peaceful. History, like the Soviet example, shows that's just not necessarily true.
So ultimately what's needed is freedom.
Freedom of belief, freedom of conscience for everyone. That seems essential for a genuinely open society. It's really in that kind of undogmatic dialogue where arguments matter, where rational persuasion is the aim, not coercion, that we can find a better way to live together.
And that feels particularly relevant right now.
It really does. The importance of valuing and actively defending an open society where different beliefs can coexist, be debated respectfully, challenged rationally.
Right.
Maybe that's never been more critical than it is today.
So what stands out to you from this deep dive? Think about these historical lessons. Dogma, state power, belief, violence. How might they apply to the world you see around you today? If you want to dig deeper, definitely check out the Feuerbringer YouTube channel and the sources we talked about. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We hope you feel maybe a bit more informed and perhaps a lot more curious.